The blast doors of the medical wing hissed open, and Dr. Ellix turned from his console as two crewmen rushed in, carrying something between them. That something groaned. "Set him down here," Ellix said, gesturing to the diagnostic bed. The two crewmen obeyed, laying a limp figure onto the surface. The human skin was blistered and red from his neck down to his forearms, and the scent of scorched protein clung to the air. "Status," Ellix demanded, extending his primary appendage to initiate the scan. "Solar flare burst," one of the crewmen said. He was on the maintenance scaffold during the flare shield recalibration. Got hit before he could make it back into the bay. Ellix's ocular ridge twitched as he scanned the human. His dermal layers are ruptured, core temperature elevated, subdermal tissues compromised. This is severe. Why wasn't he brought in sooner? The human groaned and shifted. "I told them I was fine," he muttered, eyes half-lidded. "Just a sunburn." Ellix leaned forward. "You have third-degree burns across 16% of your body. This is not a sunburn." The man cracked a grin that looked more like a grimace. "Name's Zachary Velen, and where I'm from, this counts as a bad beach day." "You are delusional," Ellix said flatly. "No, just from Arizona," Zach wheezed. Ellix didn't respond. He administered a sedative to stabilize the human's pain levels and activated the dermal regenerator, watching as the machine whirred to life. The scan data scrolled beside him, and the numbers were troubling. Zach's heart rate was elevated, but not dangerously so. His blood pressure was slightly low, likely from fluid loss. More concerning were the patches of necrotic tissue already setting in on his left bicep. Ellix motioned to the assistant drone. "Begin intravenous hydration. Administer antibiotics subcutaneously here and here," he pointed. "Prepare for debridement." Zach was already slipping into unconsciousness. "Seriously, I've had worse. Camping trip once. Fell in a campfire." Ellix stared at him. "You humans are deeply concerning." Over the next 2 hours, Ellix and his assistant worked to remove the damaged tissue, clean the wounds, and begin regeneration. The injuries were consistent with prolonged exposure to high-intensity ultraviolet and thermal radiation conditions that would have liquefied the outer dermis of most known species. Yet Zach had not only survived but had walked into the med bay under his own power. By the time Ellix finished grafting the synthetic epidermal mesh over the worst patches, Zach was stable but still unconscious. Ellix logged the details, submitted a report to command, and set an alarm for the hourly monitoring cycle. He stayed longer than necessary, observing the human's slow, rhythmic breathing. The idea that someone could experience massive tissue trauma and call it a sunburn was not only inaccurate but recklessly dismissive. The next morning, Zach blinked awake as Ellix was reviewing the progress scans. "Morning, Doc," Zach rasped. "Do you guys have coffee on this ship? Or am I stuck with those green protein cubes again?" "You should not be conscious," Ellix said. "Yeah, well, tell that to my bladder." Zach tried to sit up and immediately winced, collapsing back against the incline of the bed. Ellix moved to stabilize him. "You've suffered extensive skin damage. Movement should be minimized." Zach coughed and nodded. "Yeah, feels like I got dragged across a parking lot." "You were nearly incinerated." "Semantics." Ellix didn't dignify that with a response. He activated a restraint field to keep Zach from trying to sit up again. Zach sighed. Okay. No sudden moves." "Got it." The door opened and Lieutenant Kesakarn stepped in, arms crossed, expression tight. "Zachary, I told you to double-check the flare schedule before working up top." "I did," Zach said. "They changed it last second." "I got the old log. That's not an excuse." "Didn't say it was." Kessa turned to Ellix. "How bad is it?" "He will need at least 3 rotations in the medical bay. Full dermal regeneration will take a minimum of 6 Earth weeks. Possibly more." Kessa shook her head. "He called it a sunburn." "I am aware," Ellix said. Zach grinned weakly. "You're never gonna let that go, huh?" Ellix tilted his head slightly. "Correct." The next 2 days were uneventful, filled with cycles of treatment, cleaning, and carefully monitored regeneration. Zach remained confined to the bed, frustrated but cooperative. Occasionally, he'd crack a joke or ask bizarre questions about Ellix's physiology, but never once did he complain about the pain. Ellix noticed. On the fourth day, Zach's vitals took a dip. Fever spiked. The grafts on his left arm showed signs of rejection. Ellix immediately halted the regeneration process and began antimicrobial treatments. Zach's skin flushed a deeper red as the fever worsened. "Can't catch a break," Zach muttered, teeth clenched. "You are experiencing graft rejection. It is not uncommon," Ellix explained. "But it is critical we address it now." "Got it. Just don't let me turn into a lizard. No species here is reptilian." "Good. I don't want scales." Ellix administered a cocktail of antibiotics and adjusted the mesh to allow for better integration. The fever persisted for 29 hours before it finally broke. Throughout it all, Zach remained lucid, though increasingly exhausted. "Used to think paper cuts were the worst pain ever," Zach said late one night. "Turns out that was adorable." Ellix didn't respond. He was analyzing cellular response rates and comparing them to human baseline data. Zach was recovering slowly, but it was still far from over. By the end of week 2, Zach was able to sit up without assistance. His arms were wrapped in layers of polymer mesh, and his neck bore faint traces of the burns that had nearly taken him down. He walked short distances with assistance, grumbling the whole time but never asking to stop. Ellix, observing from the console, made a note in the log. "Patient exhibits high pain tolerance. Low regard for personal safety." Cultural norm, perhaps? He looked up as Zach returned from the corridor, leaning heavily on the railing. "Doc," Zach said, panting, "tell your treadmills not to kill me. You walked 8 meters. Felt like a marathon. Then you are not ready for extended mobility." Zach nodded, sweating. "Yeah, I figured." That night, Ellix received a message from Central Command. A delegation from the Varn Collective was arriving for diplomatic talks. Medical staff were to be on standby. When the delegation arrived, Ellix was stationed in the observation wing. Zach, still recovering, had been moved temporarily to the adjacent chamber. The Varn ambassador, a towering silver being with translucent skin, peered into the room where Zach lay. "What happened to that one?" it asked. "Solar radiation burns," Ellix replied. The ambassador tilted its head. "He is alive?" Ellix nodded. "Yes." "Was it a weapon? An attack?" "No. A star flare. He called it a sunburn." The ambassador regarded Zach for a long moment. "Terrifying." Zach, hearing this, raised a hand weakly. "Don't worry. I'm not contagious." The ambassador took a full step back. Ellix suppressed an exasperated sigh. "He is not a threat." Zach grinned. "Unless you're allergic to sarcasm." The ambassador turned to Ellix. "How do you manage them?" "I adapt." A week later, Zach was discharged from the medical wing. His skin was still sensitive and he had to wear protective sleeves, but he was walking on his own, eating solid food again, and back to arguing with the maintenance crew about tool calibration. Ellix reviewed the final scan before signing off the medical release. The human had survived something that would have killed most other species. Yet he had insisted from the moment he arrived that it was minor. Maybe it was bravado. Maybe it was cultural. Maybe it was just Zach. Either way, Ellix would be updating the interspecies medical database. Under human injury classification, he added a note: "Definitions vary. Proceed with caution." Ellix entered the recovery chamber at second cycle just after nutrient calibration. The ambient light was adjusted to mimic the human circadian preference for late morning, though the medical wing itself operated on standard ship time. The human subject, Zachary Velen, was seated at the edge of his assigned cot, legs dangling, one sock on and the other clutched loosely in his hand as though it had betrayed him. "I believe footwear is supposed to be a matched set," Ellix said without looking up from the biometric tablet. Zach gave the sock a suspicious glance. "It's got a hole right at the toe. I'm not putting my foot in that. It's a trap." "You have 7 identical pairs." "Yeah, and they all conspired." Ellix made a note to request additional socks from the quartermaster. Apparently, humans required psychologically trustworthy textiles to maintain routine hygiene. He approached the bedside and held up the scanner. Hold still. I'm checking the epithelial regeneration rate on your upper thoracic region. Zach lifted his shirt without protest. The mesh overlays had been fully absorbed now, leaving behind an uneven layer of fresh skin, pink, taut, and almost translucent in places. Ellix pressed the scanner gently against his sternum. You're healing at a statistically abnormal rate, Ellix said. Well, I drink a lot of water. That is not an explanation. I also eat more fiber than most people on this ship. That is also not an explanation. Zach shrugged, then winced. Maybe I just bounce back fast. Some people do. Ellix narrowed his gaze. You are not metabolically distinct enough from the baseline to justify the difference. Something else is contributing. Good genes. Unlikely. Your medical file lists 8 hereditary susceptibilities. Zach grinned without enthusiasm. And yet here I am, still kicking. Ellix stepped back and adjusted the scan parameters. You should still be bedridden. Instead, you are upright, mobile, and attempting to consume solid-phase NutriPaste despite the risk of nausea. I only threw up once. That is not comforting. Zach reached behind him and grabbed a folded piece of fabric. Can I go back to maintenance next week? No, week after. No, can I at least leave the mebe? You attempted to simulate sprinting yesterday. On a recovering dermal substrate, while wearing compression wraps improperly. You fell. Twice. I was testing my limits. You failed. Zach huffed, then leaned back on his arms, bracing himself against the cot. I get twitchy stuck here. It's like being grounded, but with more antiseptic. You require another full cycle of observation. Minimum. Then give me a project. Ellix paused. What kind of project? Something to do. If I'm stuck here, I might as well make myself useful. Ellix considered for a long moment. Very well. There is a catalog of recorded non-critical anomalies in the ship's environmental sensors. Most have not been reviewed due to low threat classification. You may examine the data patterns for inconsistencies. Zach blinked. You're giving me busy work. Yes. All right. I'll take it. Ellix uploaded the data set to the adjacent console and watched as Zach settled in, posture already more alert. He navigated the interface with ease, occasionally muttering about formatting choices. Within 10 minutes, he was immersed. Ellix returned to his own station. As the hours passed, he noted something curious. Zach's respiration slowed. His heart rate stabilized. His pain markers dropped below the threshold for supplemental analgesics. The human wasn't just distracted. He was somehow recovering faster while focused on irrelevant data. At the end of the cycle, Ellix approached again. You exhibit measurable physiological improvement while engaged in cognitive processing tasks. Zach didn't look up. Yeah, I've always been like that. Stress makes me worse. Being bored makes me worse. But give me a puzzle, everything else just kind of fades. That is inefficient. Not if it works. Ellix tilted his head. I will need to adjust your care plan. Zach finally turned to face him. You're serious? Yes. You will be assigned cognitive tasks during recovery periods from now on. Zach leaned back, clearly pleased. So instead of lying around feeling like a peeled potato, I get to solve space mysteries. I'll take it. 3 days later, Zach flagged something in the sensor logs. Ellix had barely entered the room when the human gestured him over. Okay, so I was going through the logs from the hydroponics bay. There was a temperature fluctuation every 78 minutes, only by a few tenths of a degree, but it's consistent. That shouldn't be happening if the system's regulated. Ellix reviewed the data. This was classified as within margin. Yeah, but margins can still hide patterns. See this? The fluctuations are synchronized with the waste reclamation cycle. That shouldn't impact hydroponics at all, right? Ellix stared at the overlay Zack had constructed. No. It should not. Then either someone rerouted coolant lines without updating the ship map or something's cross-wired. Ellix forwarded the data to engineering. Within an hour, a confirmation came back. A secondary reclamation valve had been incorrectly installed during the last overhaul. It was minor, but over time it could have affected crop yields. Zack leaned back with a satisfied sigh. See? Potato with a purpose. Ellix blinked slowly. You are a confusing organism. Later that rotation, Ellix met with Chief Medic Rel in the diagnostics hub. Rel was a tubule-bodied Zethary with a penchant for cataloging anomalies. He was already reviewing Zack's file. I see your human patient is exhibiting an aggressive recovery profile, Rel said. He is anomalously resistant to prolonged tissue trauma. He also displays elevated cognitive performance under confinement. Rel pulsed a shade darker. You are describing a creature that becomes stronger while injured and isolated. I am aware. It is troubling. Rel's tendrils tapped against the console. Have you considered environmental psychological reinforcement? I assigned him low-priority data analysis. That seemed to produce measurable benefit. Rel paused. You gave him ship data? Yes. You gave him access to internal logs. During active diplomatic presence. Ellix straightened. They were filtered. Still, that is a dangerous precedent. He found an engineering fault within hours. Rel hesitated. That is unlikely. I verified it myself. Rel leaned back. Perhaps we should begin a formal study. Controlled exposure. Cognitive engagement under duress. No, Ellix said. He is not a subject. He is a patient. Rel made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a clicking laugh. You're becoming attached. I am becoming observant. Back in the medbay, Zack was attempting to balance a nutrition cube on the flat of his palm while sipping from a hydration pack with the other hand. He glanced up as Ellix returned. Hey, document. You ever notice how none of your food has any crunch? That is intentional. Textural uniformity assists with digestion. Sure, but it makes all your meals feel like eating regret. Ellix ignored that. You are being reassigned to a mobile observation protocol. Zack blinked. Wait, I can leave the medbay? Limited areas. Supervised. You will conduct sensor diagnostics in low-traffic sections of the ship. Zack stood too quickly, then steadied himself. I'll take it. As Ellix prepared the necessary clearances, he watched the human stretch stiffly, careful of his healing skin. There was something unsettling about how quickly Zack adapted to each new constraint. Not just tolerated, leveraged. It was as if discomfort was a language he spoke fluently. Ellix, Zack said suddenly, do you think this makes me a liability? How so? Getting hurt. Taking up medbay resources. Causing a stir with the ambassadors. You did not choose to be injured. Still happened. Ellix considered. You are not a liability. You are a variable. Zack raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be comforting? It is meant to be accurate. The next morning, Zack began his rounds. He was issued a portable scanner and a limited access key. His route included auxiliary cargo halls, secondary filtration nodes, and unoccupied quarters. Ellix followed at a distance, monitoring vitals in real time. As they passed through a narrow corridor near the dorsal stabilizer, Zack paused. Something smells off. There are no olfactory readings outside standard variants. I'm telling you, something smells like burnt plastic and lemon. Ellix checked the atmospheric sensors. No anomalies detected. I'm gonna check the panel junction. Before Ellix could object, Zack had already crouched beside the access panel and begun unlatching it. Inside, a small bundle of insulation had melted around a power splice. Nothing critical yet. Ellix stared. How did you identify that through smell alone? Zack shrugged. Human noses aren't great, but mine's trained. Used to work maintenance back home. Burnt insulation always smells a little citrusy to me. You are cataloging malfunctions based on scent? Better than waiting for alarms. Ellix sent another report to engineering. Then, reluctantly, he added a note to the medical file. Subject demonstrates olfactory-based diagnostic ability. Recommend further observation. As they continued down the corridor, Zach looked over his shoulder. You know, Doc, if this keeps up, I might actually miss the mebe. You are free to return at any time. Zach laughed. Not funny. Ellix blinked once. I was not attempting humor. Zach kept walking, but his posture relaxed. A few minutes later, he found another anomaly. And another after that. Ellix followed, documenting each one. He had no idea how far this would go. But for the first time since the injury, he wasn't worried about the human. He was worried about what the human would find next. Ellix stood motionless beside a diagnostics terminal in the ship's auxiliary maintenance corridor, watching Zach wedge himself into a narrow access shaft that had not been designed for any species with a torso. The human grunted, twisted sideways, and vanished up to the knees. Do not force entry into confined spaces while your dermal layers are still in the adaptive regeneration phase, Ellix said. I'm not forcing anything. I'm gliding, came Zach's muffled voice. This panel's supposed to be sealed, but it's been rattling every time the stabilizers kick in. Figured I'd take a look. You are not on engineering duty. Zach scooted deeper into the shaft. Neither are the engineers. They said it was superficial noise. Ellix exhaled through his spiracles, a gesture that translated roughly to exasperation in his species. Your medical clearance does not include unauthorized manual diagnostics. I'm not touching anything, Zach called. Just inspecting with my eyes. Return to the corridor. There was a pause. Then Zach's legs wiggled and he slowly emerged, covered in a thin layer of carbon dust and looking far too pleased for someone whose shirt was now irreparably stained. Well, he said, brushing his pants, I didn't touch anything. But someone else did. Looks like a heat dispersion bracket was installed upside down. It's pressing against the casing. Ellix stared at him. I'll report it, Zach added. Now, are we heading to the filtration node next, or are we still pretending I'm not already doing half this ship's diagnostics? Ellix turned toward the corridor junction. Follow me. And do not enter anything. They continued in silence for several minutes. The corridor lighting dimmed slightly as they passed a power junction under recalibration. Zach glanced at the flickering panel. Do you guys ever change bulbs? Or do you just wait until they die and hope no one walks into a wall? Ellix didn't answer. He was watching the human walk. The gait was steady, but slightly uneven. Left leg compensating. Likely residual stiffness in the hip from tissue regeneration. He made a note to apply localized stimulation during the next treatment cycle. At the filtration node, Zach crouched beside the intake valve and ran the handheld scanner over the panel's surface. The readings displayed a low-grade vibration trace consistent with minor airflow irregularities. Feels off, Zach said. You cannot feel vibration through that tool, Ellix replied. No, I mean the airflow. Listen, when I put my hand here, he held his palm an inch from the ventilation seam. It pushes harder on the exhale than it draws on the inhale. Unbalanced cycle. Ellix checked the diagnostic readout. Negative pressure discrepancy detected. Marginal. Within tolerance. Within tolerance doesn't mean harmless, Zach muttered. Could be a filter belt slipping. You are not authorized to disassemble this unit. Then it's your lucky day. I only disassembled it in my head. Ellix narrowed his upper ocular ridges. That is not a valid action. Zach stood, stretched his arms above his head carefully, and winced. All right, so what's next? You gonna tell me I can't look at anything else either, or are we still pretending this is just light exercise? Ellix considered. Your post-injury performance has been unusually responsive under low-pressure investigative tasks. However, your exertion levels now require recalibration. You will return to the medbay for passive monitoring. I feel fine. That is not the same as being fine. Zach sighed. Fine. But only if you promise I can finish that batch of intake logs later. There's something weird in Section 6 humidity curve. Ellix turned, not answering. Zach followed. Back in the medbay, the human stepped onto the diagnostic platform without prompting. The scanner activated, sweeping from head to toe. Heart rate elevated, Ellix read aloud. Muscle fatigue localized in the left quadriceps and trapezius regions. Skin temperature consistent with mild exertion but not hyperthermic. I told you, Zach said. Fine. You are not a reliable narrator of your own condition. Neither are your machines. I had a fever for half a day last week and the scanner told me I was within normal. Ellix adjusted the scanner's calibration. That is because you were already compensating physiologically. Your body masked the symptom. Zach raised an eyebrow. So what you're saying is, I'm too good at pretending to be fine even when I'm not? I am saying your biology adapts faster than your judgment. The human gave a short laugh. Now that's accurate. Ellix completed the scan and administered a mild muscular stimulant across the affected areas. Zach flinched slightly but didn't object. You will remain here for the rest of the cycle, Ellix said. Passive observation only. No terminals. No diagnostics. I'll die of boredom. You have not yet died of radiation exposure. I calculate the odds of terminal boredom to be negligible. Zach rolled his eyes but didn't argue. He laid back on the cot, arms folded behind his head. A short while later, Kessa Karn entered the mebe. She nodded at Ellix and looked at Zach. Engineering confirmed your bracket theory, she said. You were right. Zach didn't move. Told you. Rattling wasn't imaginary. You also weren't cleared to investigate it. I also didn't break anything. You're still under medical restriction. And yet, things keep getting found when I'm around. Kessa looked to Ellix. Has he been cooperative? He is physically compliant. Verbally less so. I speak in helpful, Zach said. You're just not fluent. Kessa sighed. Command wants a summary of your incident for the interspecies hazard report. They're holding a review session tomorrow in the main chamber. Zach sat up. They want me there? No. They want your version of events. Preferably without metaphors or jokes. Zach glanced at Ellix. So they want me to lie. They want accuracy. Right? So, massive solar flare melts my arms instead of I got a bit overcooked. Ellix handed him a data slate. Dictate your account. I will transcribe and submit. Zach took it, staring at the blank screen. I guess I should take it seriously, he said. That would be advisable, Ellix replied. He sat in silence for several minutes, then finally began. Okay. I was on tether duty during the recalibration rotation. We just finished phase 4 when the flare alert sounded. I was exposed for maybe 20 seconds before the safety override closed the hatch. He paused. It felt like my skin was boiling from the inside. Ellix didn't interrupt. I didn't want to come in right away. Not because I didn't think it was bad, but because I didn't want to look at it. I figured if I didn't see it, it couldn't be that bad. He looked up. That's dumb, right? It is common, Ellix said. Among many species. Zach nodded. I knew I was hurt, but I've been hurt before. I've been burned before. It didn't feel like dying. It felt like being punished slowly. He set the slate aside. You can submit that, he said. Ellix took the slate. You may rest. Zach lay back, silent this time. The next morning, Ellix reviewed the final regeneration scans. The dermal layers had stabilized. Internal inflammation markers were gone. Muscle tone had returned to baseline. There were no signs of long-term tissue degradation. He approached the cot. You are cleared for duty. Zach blinked. Seriously. You will resume light tasks. No high exposure zones. No confined spaces. Zach swung his legs down, stretching experimentally. I feel ready. You should not seek further injury. I don't plan to. But it's nice knowing I'll survive if things go sideways. Ellix hesitated. You are not indestructible, he said. Zach stood, wobbling only a little. No. Just stubborn. He walked out without further ceremony. Ellix remained in the mebe reviewing the data once more. Then he submitted the full medical report. Under recovery outcome, he added a final note. Patient exhibits recovery behavior characterized by cognitive redirection, low pain aversion, and instinctive problem engagement. Recommend observation only if necessary. Otherwise, let the human be.